The scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee was the smell of my life. For 31 years, it had been the backdrop to my existence, a comforting aroma that permeated my corner office on the 14th floor of the Norcross Systems Tower. From my window, I could see the entire sprawl of Denver, the Rocky Mountains a majestic, jagged promise on the horizon. I had watched this city change from this very vantage point, just as I'd watched Norcross Systems grow from a fledgling startup in a converted warehouse into a multi-state logistics software giant. My name is Teresa Langford, and at 59 years old, I was the Director of Compliance, a title I had earned through decades of meticulous, unwavering dedication. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of college when the company was just a dozen people with a big dream. I'd survived 4 mergers, 6 different CEOs, and countless rounds of so-called strategic realignments. Through it all, I was the bedrock, the institutional memory, the one who ensured that for all our aggressive growth, we never ran afoul of the labyrinthine regulations that governed our industry. I kept us out of legal trouble, maintained our regulatory standards, and earned the respect of everyone who mattered. Everyone, that is, except Brian Kessler. Brian was the new chief financial officer, a 39-year-old wunderkind poached from a high-powered consulting firm 8 months ago. He strode through the halls with the predatory grace of a shark, his designer suits perfectly tailored, his smile a flash of white that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. His mandate was simple and brutal: optimize operational efficiency. In corporate speak, that meant slash costs, and in his eyes, anything that didn't directly generate revenue was a liability. From day one, he made it clear that he viewed my department, the compliance department, as a necessary evil rather than a business safeguard. During budget meetings, when I requested resources for regulatory updates or essential training, he would roll his eyes, a subtle but deeply insulting gesture. He questioned every expenditure, every consultant fee, every training session that kept us ahead of industry changes and out of the courtroom. He saw my life's work not as a shield protecting the company, but as a bloated expense on a spreadsheet. The tension between us was a low hum in the corporate symphony, an unspoken discord that everyone felt but no one dared to address. He represented the new Norcross, lean, aggressive, and devoid of sentiment. I, with my 31 years of service, represented the old Norcross, a company that once valued loyalty and experience. I was just 27 days away from my full pension vesting. 27 days from the finish line of a marathon I had run with everything I had. My late husband, David, and I had planned our retirement around it. We'd bought our modest 2-bedroom house in Lakewood in 1995, and thanks to my steady income, we'd paid it off. The pension was the final piece of the puzzle, the key to a future of comfort, travel, and spoiling the grandchildren I hoped to have someday. After David passed, that pension became more than just money. It was the culmination of a life we had built together, a promise I had made to both of us. That Tuesday morning began like any other. I'd arrived early, reviewed the latest FDA compliance bulletins for our medical logistics clients, and was preparing for a meeting about upcoming DOT certification renewals. The coffee was hot, the mountains were clear, and the hum of the office was just beginning to build. At 10 a.m., an email from Brian's assistant pinged in my inbox. The subject line was chillingly vague: meeting request. My heart gave a little lurch. Brian never requested meetings with me unless it was to question my budget. I walked down the long corridor to his expansive corner office, the plush carpet muffling my sensible heels. His office was the antithesis of mine. Mine was filled with 30 years of memories, industry awards, photos from company milestones, a framed picture of David and me on our anniversary trip to Yellowstone. His was a sterile landscape of glass, chrome, and mahogany. Not a single personal item was in sight.
Teresa, come in.
Close the door, he said, not looking up from his computer. He gestured to one of the 2 severe-looking chairs in front of his massive desk. I sat, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap. The air was thick with a tension that felt different, sharper than our usual budget squabbles. He finally turned his gaze to me, his expression unreadable. He slid a thin folder across the polished mahogany surface. It was a practiced, dismissive gesture, like a card dealer tossing away a losing hand. Effective immediately, he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Your position is being eliminated due to restructuring. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, my vision tunneling slightly. Restructuring. The age-old corporate euphemism for firing someone you didn't have a real reason to fire. I stared at the folder, then back at his impassive face. 31 years. Your department's functions will be absorbed by legal, he continued, adjusting his perfectly knotted designer tie. This is purely a business decision, Teresa. Nothing personal. The board needs to see immediate cost reductions and, frankly, compliance can be handled by our legal department going forward. Nothing personal. The most personal betrayal of my professional life, and he waved it away as a line item on a balance sheet. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but decades of corporate discipline held my expression in check. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The severance package is quite generous, considering the circumstances, he added, a flicker of something relief in his eyes that I was taking it so calmly. 12 weeks of pay, plus your accrued vacation time. You'll need to sign this by Friday, or the offer is rescinded. You'll get nothing. Sign this by Friday, or you get nothing. An ultimatum. A threat. 12 weeks versus the full pension I had earned through 31 years of dedicated service. The mathematics were insulting. I stared at the document that would end my life at Norcross, the document that stood between me and my full pension. That was all it was. 27 days. Something felt deeply wrong about the timing. Too convenient. Too calculated. In all my years at Norcross, I had never seen anyone terminated this close to their pension eligibility. Company policy, a policy I myself had helped draft, explicitly protected employees within 30 days of vesting from termination, without significant cause. He knew. This 39-year-old CFO knew exactly what he was doing. I nodded calmly, though a fire of pure, unadulterated rage was beginning to burn in my chest. I understand, I said. I reached for the folder, my hand steady. I'll review this carefully.
Good.
I appreciate your professionalism about this, he said, already turning back to his screen, dismissing me. He seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting back, that I wasn't making a scene. He had underestimated me. He saw a woman approaching retirement, a relic of a bygone era, someone who would quietly accept her fate. He didn't see the fire burning behind my calm exterior, or the network of relationships I had built over 3 decades in this industry. He didn't understand that in my line of work, documentation was everything. As I walked out of his office, I caught my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. I looked like any other woman approaching retirement, graying blonde hair neatly styled, a conservative business suit, sensible shoes. Invisible. But I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a dormant volcano, and Brian Kessler had just kicked the rock that was holding back the eruption. I returned to my office on the 14th floor, the same corner space I had occupied for the past 8 years. The walls were lined with regulatory certificates, industry awards, and photographs spanning my career at Norcross. There was the picture from our first major software deployment in 2003, my team beaming with pride. Another from the company's 20th anniversary celebration, a younger me standing beside the company founder. And dozens more, chronicling the evolution of both the company and my role within it. My assistant, Patricia, a bright young woman I'd mentored for the last 4 years, looked up from her desk as I entered, her eyes wide with concern. Teresa? I heard rumors. Is everything okay? I'm clearing out my office, Patricia, I said simply. My position has been eliminated. Her face went pale. But you're so close to retirement.
Can they do that?
Apparently they can, I replied, my voice hard. I began removing personal items from my desk drawers, each one a small piece of my professional life. The stress ball from our 2015 audit marathon, squeezed countless times in late-night sessions. The coffee mug my dear friend and mentor, Ruth Delgado, had given me when she retired 6 months ago. It said, "Compliance Queen." A framed photo of my late husband David, taken during our anniversary trip to Yellowstone, his warm smile a constant source of strength. As I placed these small treasures into a cardboard box, the shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. Patricia lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to help. She, more than anyone, understood how integral I was to Norcross's operations. I handled everything from FDA compliance for our medical logistics clients to transportation regulations for our freight management systems. My departure would leave a massive knowledge gap, a chasm that couldn't simply be absorbed by the legal department, who knew nothing of the day-to-day operational nuances. The box containing 31 years of my professional life fit easily in the trunk of my Honda Accord. As I drove through downtown Denver toward my home in Lakewood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening at Norcross. Brian's termination speech had been too polished, too rehearsed. The severance contract had been prepared in advance, with specific clauses that seemed designed to prevent me from seeking legal recourse. I had seen enough corporate maneuvering over the years to recognize a setup when I encountered one. The timing was suspicious, the explanation was weak, and most telling of all, Brian had seemed nervous, despite his confident performance. He kept checking his watch and glancing at his computer screen, as if he was following a predetermined script. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. The caller ID showed Patricia's number. "Teresa? I had to call you. After you left, Brian came down to your office with two people I didn't recognize. They spent an hour going through your files and computer. When I asked what they were doing, Brian said they were securing sensitive materials for the transition." "Did they take anything?" "They took all my records," I said, a knot tightening in my stomach. "Performance reviews, cost-benefit analyses, documentation of compliance successes, everything that would prove my value to the company." "That might work in our favor," a new voice said on the line. It was Ruth Delgado. Patricia must have looped her in. "Taking your files could be seen as destroying evidence. And besides, I have copies of your performance reviews in my HR files. You've been rated exemplary for 8 consecutive years." I felt a surge of gratitude for Ruth's foresight and loyalty. She had always been meticulous about documentation, a trait that had served her well during her HR career and was about to serve me even better. "Teresa, this doesn't make sense," Patricia whispered, her voice fraught with worry. "The Morrison audit is next month. The DOT certification renewal is due in 6 weeks. How can they possibly?" "They will figure it out," I interrupted gently, though a new, colder thought was forming in my mind. "They always do." But even as I said it, I knew Patricia was right. Brian Kessler had no idea what my department actually did. He saw compliance as paperwork and bureaucracy, not as the complex web of relationships and expertise that kept Norcross functioning legally across multiple jurisdictions. I had spent years building connections with regulatory agencies, understanding the nuances of ever-changing requirements, and developing internal processes that made compliance seamless for our operational teams. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I had prevented a potential lawsuit that could have cost the company millions when I caught a software glitch that was incorrectly calculating freight classifications. 6 months before that, I had negotiated with state regulators to avoid penalties when our Jacksonville office accidentally processed shipments using outdated hazmat protocols. These weren't just administrative tasks. They were business-critical interventions that protected Norcross's reputation and bottom line. "Ruth," I said, my voice low and firm, "I need to ask you something. Do you still have access to any of your old HR files from Norcross?" There was a pause. I shouldn't, but she paused again, and I could hear the decision being made. When I retired, I kept copies of certain documents for my own protection. Employment contracts, policy changes, executive communications. Things that might be relevant if anyone ever questioned decisions I had made during my tenure. I never thought I'd need them this soon. The next day, I was at Ruth's kitchen table. She lived in a well-maintained ranch house in Westminster, about 20 minutes from my own home. She greeted me at the door with a grim expression that told me she had spent the night thinking about my situation. "I've been going through my files," she said, leading me to her home office. Her desk was covered with manila folders, printouts of emails, and handwritten notes. "Teresa, what I found is worse than I initially thought." She handed me a printed message. "This email is from February. It's from Brian Kessler to the executive team discussing pension liability optimization. Look at this paragraph." I read it aloud, my hands shaking. "Our analysis indicates that preventing certain high-tenure employees from reaching full vesting could significantly improve our quarterly projections. Legal recommends structuring any necessary workforce adjustments as performance-based terminations or departmental consolidations to minimize exposure." My blood ran cold. The email specifically mentioned identifying employees within 60 days of pension vesting and developing appropriate transition strategies for their positions. While it didn't mention me by name, the timing and criteria made it clear that I had been targeted months ago. "Ruth," I whispered, "this is evidence of conspiracy. How did you get this?" "Executive emails were automatically copied to HR for documentation purposes," she explained. "It was company policy to ensure we had records of all employment-related decisions. When I retired, I kept copies of sensitive communications that might be relevant to future legal issues." She handed me another document, a spreadsheet showing all Norcross employees within 90 days of pension vesting. My name was highlighted in yellow, along with 3 others: James Morrison from IT, Sandra Williams from Sales, and Robert Chen from Operations. Next to each name were notes about potential restructuring opportunities. "Teresa, you weren't the only target. They're planning to eliminate anyone who's about to become expensive in terms of pension obligations." I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. It was a systematic plan to cheat long-term employees out of their earned benefits. "Have any of the others been terminated yet?" I asked. "Not yet. But according to this timeline, James Morrison is scheduled for next month, Sandra Williams in 6 weeks. They're spacing out the terminations to make them look unrelated." Ruth pulled out another folder, this one containing internal memos about the compliance department specifically. "These show that Brian has been building a case against your department for months. He's been documenting every minor expense, questioning every consultant fee, and creating a paper trail to justify eliminating the position." "But the department is essential," I protested. "We prevent legal issues that could cost millions." "That's not how Brian sees it. Look at this memo from him to the CEO." She handed me a document titled Operational Efficiency Analysis, Compliance Department. The memo argued that compliance functions could be streamlined by transferring responsibilities to the legal department, resulting in immediate cost savings of over $200,000 annually. What the memo failed to mention was that the legal department had no expertise in regulatory compliance, no relationships with regulatory agencies, and no understanding of the day-to-day operational requirements that kept Norcross in good standing with various government bodies. The final, most infuriating piece of evidence was a copy of Ruth's notes from a board meeting in June. Remember that presentation Brian gave to the board about right-sizing operational expenses? I attended that meeting as HR director. Here are my notes. Her handwritten notes were detailed and damning. Brian had presented a 5-year plan that included strategic workforce optimization, targeting employees with the highest benefit costs. He had used charts and graphs to show how eliminating legacy personnel could improve profit margins by up to 12% annually. When board members had raised concerns about losing experienced employees, Brian had dismissed their objections by arguing that institutional knowledge was less valuable than operational agility in a rapidly changing technology sector. He claimed that younger employees with current skills could handle traditional responsibilities more efficiently. The board approved his plan. I voiced my concerns about age discrimination and the risk of losing critical expertise, Ruth said quietly. But I was overruled. 3 weeks later, they announced my early retirement package. This revelation stunned me. Ruth, are you saying they forced you out too? Not exactly forced, but strongly encouraged. They offered me a very generous early retirement package and made it clear that my traditional approach to human resources wasn't aligned with their new vision. I was tired of fighting corporate politics, so I took the deal and left. She sighed, a deep, weary sound. I realize now that my departure was part of the same strategy that is now targeting you. By removing the experienced HR director who might object to questionable employment practices, Brian had cleared the way for implementing his pension dumping scheme without internal resistance. Ruth and I spent the entire weekend organizing our evidence and developing our strategy. By Sunday evening, we had built a comprehensive case. On Monday morning, I called attorney David Richardson, a man whom Ruth had worked with during her previous company's pension dumping case. After reviewing our evidence, he agreed to take my case on a contingency basis. This is one of the clearest examples of pension manipulation I've seen, Richardson told us during our Tuesday meeting. The documentation is exceptional, and the pattern of targeting employees near vesting is obvious. We're going to file a formal complaint with the Department of Labor while simultaneously pursuing wrongful termination and age discrimination claims. That afternoon, Richardson filed our complaint. By Wednesday morning, the local news station, Channel 7, was running a story titled, "Denver Software Company Accused of Pension Fraud." The reporter had obtained copies of our legal filing and was interviewing employment law experts about the broader implications of pension dumping schemes. By Thursday, the story had been picked up by the Denver Post and several industry publications. Norcross Systems was suddenly facing intense public scrutiny. Their stock price dipped. Potential clients were asking questions about the company's ethical standards. The tide was turning. On Friday morning, just hours before my severance offer was set to expire, Brian Kessler called me. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Teresa, we need to talk. This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Brian," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a mountain stream in winter. His tone shifted, a desperate edge creeping in. "The board wants to resolve this matter quietly. We're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement." "I'll have my attorney contact you," I said, and hung up. The following Monday brought developments that exceeded even Ruth's optimistic expectations. Richardson called to inform me that the Department of Labor was launching a formal investigation into Norcross Systems' pension practices. And 3 additional employees, James Morrison, Sandra Williams, and Robert Chin, had contacted his office, claiming they had been terminated under suspicious circumstances. "Teresa, this is becoming a class action case," Richardson explained. "We now have James Morrison, who was terminated last week, exactly 60 days before his pension vested. We have documentation of Sandra Williams being placed on a performance improvement plan despite stellar reviews, clearly setting up her termination. And we have a former IT director who was let go 2 years ago under circumstances that now look highly suspicious." Meanwhile, the media attention was intensifying. Channel 7 had interviewed pension law experts who explained how companies could save millions by systematically eliminating employees just before they qualified for full benefits. The story resonated with viewers because it represented a fundamental betrayal of the social contract between employers and loyal workers. Ruth called me on Wednesday with news that made my day. "Teresa, I just heard from Patricia. Brian called an emergency meeting yesterday to announce that the compliance department is being reconstituted immediately. Apparently, 3 clients have raised concerns about regulatory oversight, and the Morrison audit next week has become a crisis because nobody understands your old procedures." She chuckled. "Are they offering you your job back?" "Not yet. But Patricia says Brian looked absolutely miserable during the meeting. The board has apparently been asking very pointed questions about why they eliminated such a critical function right before major compliance deadlines." I smiled. The wheels of justice were turning, and Brian Kessler was being crushed beneath them. As I studied the documents spread across Ruth's desk, I realized that my termination was just the beginning of a much larger problem at Norcross. Brian Kessler wasn't just stealing my pension, He was systematically dismantling the institutional knowledge and experience that had made the company successful for over 3 decades. Ruth made fresh coffee while I continued reviewing the documents. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Brian Kessler's strategy, but also revealed something more personal and infuriating. He had been planning my termination since the day he was hired. My journey to justice had taught me that loyalty and integrity, while not always immediately rewarded, ultimately provide the strongest foundation for both personal satisfaction and professional vindication. And as I looked toward the future, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply ensuring that the truth comes to light, and that my years of careful documentation and professional relationships had given me the tools to fight back when it mattered most.